Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing in the blue-grey hour before sunrise, where the river wears a skin of mist and the world still seems undecided about whether it wishes to wake at all. Cold stone presses through the soles of your boots. Damp straw clings to the hem of your rough wool tunic. Somewhere above you, smoke from last night's fire has lodged itself in the rafters and now hangs there stubbornly, as though even the smoke cannot quite bear to leave this place. You smell wet wood, old grain, horse sweat from a nearby cart, and the clean, iron scent of water moving in the dark. Far off, a bell from a priory sounds through the fog, soft and hollow, counting an hour no one here truly needs announced because the river is time enough. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You have mud on your boots before the day has even properly begun. Your fingers are already numb, and you probably would not last a week out here without complaining to at least 3 saints and 1 passing mule. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you are in the world and what your local time is as you settle in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand beside the mill before the first real light, and the building looms like something half practical, half legendary. It is all timber and stone, black beams against whitening mist, with an oak door banded in iron and a roof still wet with dew. The great wheel waits in the dark along the riverbank, silent for now, slick with night moisture. Even at rest it has a heavy look, as if it dreams of labour. Some swear that a mill wheel listens when no one else does, and that if you speak too freely beside it after sunset, the wheel remembers by morning. No one can quite agree whether that tale began because millers are good at hearing secrets, or because the river carries every whisper downstream to ears unseen. You rub your hands together and breathe into them. The air tastes cold enough to bite. Your sleeping place lies just behind you in the low room attached to the mill house, where the rushes on the floor have long ago stopped pretending to be fresh. They smell faintly of old herbs, spilled ale, and damp boots, because life here is a steady layering of one day upon another. A wool blanket still lies in a heap where you kicked it off before rising. A half-burned tallow candle sits on a stool beside the wall, leaning like a tired pilgrim. There is no luxury in any of this, but there is habit, and habit is nearly as comforting. The village beyond the mill has not yet properly stirred. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. In one cottage, a pale thread of smoke begins to rise. In another, someone coughs the sort of cough that belongs only to cold mornings and old peat fires. The road leading past the mill is still more mud than road, deeply rutted from cartwheels and patched here and there with old straw thrown down in hopeful defiance. When daylight comes, the villagers will trudge this way carrying sacks of barley, rye, oats, and sometimes wheat if fortune has smiled on them and not immediately regretted it. They will come with bent backs and flower hopes, with muttered prices, with suspicion hidden under politeness. A miller is necessary, which is not at all the same thing as beloved. You know this before the first customer ever reaches the door. Everyone does. The miller stands in a curious place in the village mind, useful, always, respected, perhaps. If the stones are honest and the measures fair, trusted, less often than a priest and more often than a tax collector, which is not exactly a glowing triumph. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether millers earned their doubtful reputation through greed, opportunity, or simply the fact that any man handling another family's grain is bound to be watched like a cat near cream. For now, though, no one is watching you except the river. You go to the sluice gate first, because the water decides everything. The wood is cold beneath your palms, the iron latch colder still. Frost has silvered the edges, though the season is not yet deep winter. You lean your weight into the mechanism and feel the old timbers complain. The sound is low and stiff, a groan from the throat of the mill itself. Water shifts, gathers, presses. A stronger rush begins under the wheel, and the river's voice deepens from murmuring to purpose. It always starts like this, with listening. Before the wheel turns, before the stones hum, before flour rises into the air and settles in your hair and eyebrows until you look half man, half ghost, you listen for what is wrong. A bad knock in the gearing, a sluggish current, a splintering creak where no splintering creak should be. Even now, in the dimness, you tilt your head like a monk over a suspicious manuscript. Medieval people trust sounds in a way later centuries forget. The crack of wood, the hiss of damp on fire, the hollow ring of an empty bin, the distant bell of the abbey, all of them speak plainly if you have lived long enough among them. Some swear that St. Victor, protector against sudden calamity, blesses those who wake before dawn and attend properly to hinges, locks, and tools. It may be true, or it may simply be that careful people survive to tell the story. At last the wheel stirs, not gracefully. Nothing this heavy ever begins gracefully. It lurches, hesitates, then turns with the deep wet creak. The paddles catch the water. A shudder passes through beam and post, down into the stones beneath your feet. Then comes the slow, gathering rhythm of work awakening. The wheel turns, the axle answers. Inside the mill, the hidden workings begin their patient conversation of wood against wood, peg against socket, stone waiting for grain. You step indoors and close the door against the worst of the damp. The air inside is warmer by a degree so small it hardly deserves the word, yet it feels merciful. Grain dust already lives in the place so thoroughly that even the dawn light, when it reaches through the shutter cracks, seems to arrive pre-sifted. Sacks are stacked against one wall. Tools hang from pegs, a wooden scoop, a balance scale, a short iron hook, a broom made from bound twigs worn to a stubborn fringe. An iron key hangs from your belt and knocks softly against your hip whenever you move. It is a plain sound, but a satisfying one. Keys always make a person feel more powerful than his breakfast suggests. You stoop beside the millstones and lay a hand upon the casing. The vibration builds gradually under your palm. There is comfort in that too. The stones are dressed well enough for now. They will need tending again, cut and sharpened with a mill bill when their grinding faces wear smooth. But that is not today's grief. Today's grief will likely be something smaller and more insulting. The medieval way. A jammed chute, a split sack. A customer who insists his grain was better before it met your machinery. History is full of kings and battles, but most real lives are governed by stubborn fittings and bad weather. Light grows by small degrees. Through the doorway, you see the sky soften from slate to pearl. The mist above the river begins to lift in thin scarves. A crow lands on the fence post, gives you a look of ancient disappointment, and flies off again. Somewhere beyond the fields, monastery bells sound once more. More clearly now, they mark the canonical hour, though here at the mill the body already knew it was time. Even so, the bells matter. They remind the whole valley that monks are awake. Prayers are being said, candles are being lit before relics, and while ordinary people stamp their feet in the mud and think about breakfast, heaven is being addressed professionally. You fetch a crust of coarse bread from the board near the hearth and chew it standing up. It is yesterday's bread, hard at the edge, but not yet hard enough to threaten your teeth with martyrdom. Beside it sits a little pot of ale gone flat in the night. You drink from it anyway, because the day is long and water, though abundant, is not always to be trusted once it has met too many boots, beasts, and buckets. The bread tastes of rye and smoke. A few grains cling to your thumb. Flour will soon coat everything more thoroughly. But for this brief moment the mill is still at the edge of possibility, not yet fully claimed by labour. And this is the hour you begin to feel the shape of your life most clearly. Not in grand thoughts. No medieval miller wakes sighing about destiny, but in the steady, ordinary knowledge that the village will soon come to your door, that the river must be watched, that grain will become meal under your care, that the same wheel turned yesterday and will turn tomorrow if God, weather, and warped timber allow it. The day ahead stretches long and dusty already, though it has barely begun. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the mill serves the river, the village, the manor lord, or simply itself. Then, at last, from down the muddy track, you hear it, the dull creak of cartwheels and the muffled tread of someone approaching through the mist. The first customer of the day is on the road. The cart announces itself before the man does. With that weary wooden creak every axle seems to learn after a lifetime in mud. You stand in the doorway of the mill and watch the shape emerge through the whitening mist. A narrow cart, one patient horse, two bulging sacks, and a figure wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that has seen better winters and worse arguments. The road is barely a road at all this close to the river, just two dark grooves cut through damp earth, with frost still clinging in silver frills to the weeds at the edges. The horse blows a cloud from its nostrils and lowers its head as if already regretting its participation in the morning. The man on the cart is Hamo, a tenant from the far edge of the village lands, though he always arrives with the solemn expression of someone visiting a court where justice is rumoured but never personally witnessed. He climbs down stiffly, boots sinking at once into the mud, and gives you the sort of nod that aims for friendliness but lands somewhere nearer armed neutrality. You are early, you say. He snorts and pulls one sack closer by its tied neck. You are open. That, in the medieval countryside, counts as lively conversation. You take the iron key from your belt and turn to the side chamber where grain is held and measured before milling. The lock gives with a dry click. Oak boards swell in wet weather and shrink in cold, and this door likes to behave as though every opening is a personal insult. You shoulder it inward. The smell inside is thick and familiar raw grain, old chaff, timber dust, mouse droppings somewhere hidden but definitely not imagined, and the faint ghost of herbs once hung from the beams to discourage rot and vermin. Some swear dried tansy above a grain room keeps not only mice but malicious spirits away. Others insist mice, spirits, and tax collectors all enter where they please and laugh at herbs equally. Hamo drags the first sack in behind you. His breath smokes in the air. Barley, he says. Good enough grain. Good enough is not praise so much as a plea to destiny. You untie the mouth of the sack and dip in your wooden scoop. The kernels run through with a dry clicking whisper, cool and hard against your skin. You lift a handful, bring them near the light coming through the shutters, and roll them in your palm. This part matters. Damp grain clogs. Dirty grain offends the stones. Thin grain yields poor meal and even poorer tempers. You've seen all three before breakfast often enough to distrust any sack on principle. Today's barley is decent, not lordly, not abbey-worthy, but sound, A few husks and bits of field rubbish lurk within it, but nothing scandalous. You say, 'cause a miller never gives full comfort too quickly. Hamo shifts his weight. It was a dry week when we threshed. So I can see that pleases him more than he means to show. In villages like this, approval is rarely spoken plainly. It leaks out around the edges. You bring out the balance and measuring vessel. Here the real watchfulness begins, because every eye follows the tools. The earliest hour does not soften suspicion, it sharpens it. Grain is food, and food is life made portable. Every handful matters. The toll due to the lord or by custom to the miller is one of those facts everyone accepts and resents with admirable consistency. A man will hand over barley for grinding with the same expression he might wear while surrendering a favourite child to a monastery pious on the surface, privately wounded underneath. You pour, level, weigh, and note the measure in your head. There is no clerk here with neat ink-stained fingers and a parchment roll. That sort of luxury belongs to manor courts, priory cellars, and men who sit more than they lift. Your accounts live first in memory, then in marks scratched later by candlelight onto wax tablets or scraps of parchment if you are feeling grand. A miller's mind must hold numbers the way a church holds echoes. By the time the first sack is set aside for feeding into the hopper, another figure appears on the track, this one on foot, then another. Dawn has begun to pull the village toward you as surely as the current pulls at the wheel. A widow named Alice comes bent under a smaller sack of rye, her shawl pinned tight under her chin, and her face set in that expression older women wear when they have outlived nonsense and do not intend to take up the habit again. Behind her trudges a boy with oats slung over one shoulder, all elbows, ears, and sleepy resentment. Somewhere farther back you hear voices. The day is arriving in installments. Before long the doorway holds cold air, damp hems, and the low murmur of waiting people. Grain changes hands, but so does gossip, and gossip is almost as necessary to village life as flour. A pig has gone lame. A cartwheel broke near the ford. The reeve was seen yesterday talking too long with a stranger in a dark cloak, which means either nothing at all or a great deal, depending on who tells it. The priest has acquired beeswax candles finer than usual, which leads half the village to suspect a generous donor and the other half to suspect accounting miracles. No one can quite agree whether the abbey relic said to cure ague is genuine bone, carved ivory, or a piece of old sheep no monk has had the courage to question. You keep one ear on these matters and both eyes on the work. The hopper must be filled carefully or too fast, and the stones choke, too slow, and the grinding falters. You lift the barley, feel the weight drag through your shoulders, and pour it into place. The mill answers at once. Below the wooden casing, the great stones begin their true labour, their turning now steadier, fuller, with a deep, living rumble that travels through the floorboards and up your legs. Grain vanishes downward and returns transformed. The first pale meal slipping out in a warm dusty stream. It lands in the chest below with a softness that seems too gentle for work so loud. And there it is, the first flour of the day, still faintly warm from friction, smelling of grain and stone and effort. Dust rises around you almost immediately. It clings to sleeves, settles in eyelashes, powders the backs of hands. By noon you will look as if some restless saint has attempted to bless you with a sack instead of a prayer. Hamo watches the flow with a narrowed gaze, already calculating whether the meal looks fair, whether the stones have been honest, whether the mill has eaten more than its proper share. He is not rude about it. Medieval villagers are rarely rude in the open when food is involved. They simply watch with the intensity usually reserved for miracles and suspicious dogs. Alice, waiting her turn, warms her hands near the small hearth and says, "Cold enough to split wood by staring at it." "Cold enough to improve tempers," you say. She gives you a look that dismisses this as impossible. "Then we ought to bring the whole village in here." A small laugh goes around the room, sleepy and brief. Humour at this hour is never energetic. It drifts like smoke. The boy with the oats leans too close to the machinery and gets gently yanked back by his mother's sleeve before he can lose a finger and become a sermon. Mills fascinate children in the same way they alarm sensible adults. There is power in them, visible power, not the distant sort kept by lords behind walls, but practical force that roars and shakes the boards underfoot. Some swear millstones can be offended if cursed at, and that insulted stones grind hotter and steal more meal. You have never seen proof. Still, people speak more politely near the machinery than they do to one another, which may be recommendation enough. More sacks arrive, more names, more nods and narrowed eyes. You sort them, mark the order, answer questions that are really accusations wrapped in courtesy. Is the water running strong? Are the stones clean? Did not Bran's last sack come back a little dark? Was the toll always this much? Was it not lower in the old miller's day? That last one is a favourite, because every dead man becomes generous once he can no longer defend his accounts. You reply as millers do calmly, briefly, and with just enough patience to suggest virtue while privately practising endurance. Outside, daylight has now fully taken the mist apart. The river flashes between bare branches. The wheel turns steadily, dripping diamonds into the current. Crows quarrel in the field beyond. The village is awake. Smoke rises from roofs. Somewhere a bell rings again, and somewhere else a dog that barked before dawn has now decided to commit itself to the profession. Inside the mill, the line of customers thickens, the meal chest fills, the dust grows warm and constant, and the long day properly begins around you, not with drama, not with any grand proclamation, but with keys turned, sacks opened, grain judged, and the first quiet battle for fairness already underway. By the time the last of the early sacks has been stacked against the wall, the mill is fully awake, and so are you, whether your bones approve or not. The wheel no longer lurches or hesitates as it did before dawn. It turns with steady purpose now, drawing strength from the river in that old, relentless exchange by which moving water becomes labour, labour becomes meal, and meal becomes bread on trenches in cottages all through the village. The sound settles into the whole place like weather. There is the deep revolving groan from the axle, the ceaseless wooden chatter of gears above, the fuller, rougher hum of stone on stone below, and over it all the light hiss and slide of grain making its brief descent into usefulness. You stand near the hopper with flour beginning to pale your sleeves and beard, if beard you have, and watch the whole contrivance behave itself. That is more or less your task, though the word watch makes it sound calmer than it feels. A mill is not a thing you set in motion and leave to its own thoughts. Left unwatched, it will find some fresh way to embarrass you before noon. A trickle becomes a clog. A groan becomes a split peg. Grain bridges in the hopper and stops feeding evenly. The stones heat too quickly. The meal comes coarse when it ought to be fine. Fine when it ought to be coarse, or worst of all, inconsistent enough to invite 10 separate opinions from 10 equally certain villagers. No one can quite agree whether millwork is craft, burden, or a long argument with wood and water. Standing here in the dust, you suspect it is all three. You bend to the little trembling shoe that feeds grain into the eye of the upper stone. The motion is small but constant, a shivering nudge that keeps the kernels moving. If it slackens, the whole rhythm alters. If it chatters too sharply, grain spills faster than the stones can treat kindly. You make a slight adjustment with practiced fingers. Instantly the tone of the grinding changes, not loudly, but enough for you to hear. Medieval life trains the ear better than most schools ever will. A monk may learn his psalms by bell and breath. You learn your trade by hums, taps, and warning knocks that arrive before disaster if you're wise enough to listen. Hamo lingers longer than necessary, as people do when they want reassurance without admitting the need. He watches the meal fall from the spout into the wooden chest and says, "Looks fast today." The river is in a good temper. That changes. So does yours. He gives you a narrow look, but the corner of his mouth betrays him. That is almost a smile. In this village, almost a smile counts as hearty fellowship. He kneels and rubs some of the fresh meal between thumb and forefinger. Texture matters. Every household knows it. Fine flour for favoured bread if fortune permits. Coarser meal for the usual loaves, porridge, pottage thickening, and all the practical feeding of a life that never appears in songs. His fingers move carefully, thoughtfully. You notice the cracked skin at his knuckles, the ingrained dirt no washing quite persuades to leave, the quiet seriousness of a man examining what his family will eat. "It's right enough," he says at last. Praise from Hamo arrives in a disguise so convincing it nearly fools the saints. You nod and lift another measure toward the hopper. The sack strains your shoulders. Grain is never heavy in story until you actually pick it up. Then it becomes nothing but weight, honest and immediate. You tip it in, and the mill answers with renewed fullness. Dust swirls in the shafts of morning light that now angle through the shutters. The air itself seems milled, thick with pale drifting particles. They settle on the oak beams, on the iron fittings, on your lashes, on the hair of the boy still waiting with his mother's oats. He sneezes once, explosively, and startles himself so badly that even Alice almost smiles. "Bless you," she says. "Or curse the flower," you say. "Both may be true," she replies. There is old belief enough in that. Some swear sneezing near fresh ground meal means abundance coming. Some swear it means an unexpected guest before supper. Others insist it merely means the mill is being a mill, which is the most convincing miracle of all. Medieval people are generous with meaning. A dropped spoon, an owl at noon, a dog that refuses the threshold, smoke that curls downward instead of up. Any of them may carry a hint from heaven, a warning from the dead, or simply poor ventilation. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such signs comfort people because they reveal the world, or because they make uncertainty feel shared. You move to the stone adjustment, laying your hand lightly to the tentering mechanism that governs the distance between the millstones. This is delicate work, too wide, and the grain escapes half chewed, coarse as pebbled sand, too close, and the stones kiss too hard, overheat, and threaten sparks no sane miller wishes to see among flour dust and dry wood. You ease the setting by a breath. The sound changes again, less harsh, more velvety in its rough way. The meal flowing below softens in appearance. It takes years to trust your hand with that tiny movement. A child thinks mills are governed by strength. A grown miller knows they are governed by fractions, patience, and the refusal to panic when everything starts knocking at once. Outside, the river glints through the open crack in the door. You step briefly to the threshold and look toward the wheel. Water presses under it in shining bands, green-brown and cold, carrying leaves, twigs, and the occasional bit of floating nonsense from upstream. The paddles rise dripping and descend again in perfect obedience. The sight is soothing in the same way a fire can be soothing if you're not the one chopping wood for it. Some swear river spirits resent mills because the wheel steals the water's freedom and forces it into human service. Others say the river enjoys the company and grows sulky when a mill falls silent. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though all of them lower their voices when discussing it after dark. You return inside before the chill can settle into your back. The warmth of labour here is modest, but real friction from the stones, breath from bodies, the small hearth glowing low, the work itself keeping your hands from going numb. The boy with the oats has finally been allowed closer, under stern supervision, and he stares at the gears overhead with the reverence usually shown to relics. They do have something holy about them, in a practical medieval way. Pegged wood, turned by water, lifting and translating motion through the frame, each piece doing exactly one thing and relying on all the others to do theirs. It is not elegant as a cathedral is elegant. It is better mannered than that. It is useful. You hand the boy a little pinch of bran from the side and watch him inspect it as if he has been given treasure. Children accept poor gifts beautifully if they are tired enough. The next sack up is rye, darker and sharper smelling than barley. The grain slips into the hopper with a different note, a denser whisper. You adjust again, because each grain asks its own courtesy from the stones. Oats mill differently, wheat differently again. A lazy miller blames the grain. A good one blames himself first and the river second. Never blame the stones aloud, though that is bad luck in more villages than you can count, and while you're not a fearful man by nature, there is no sense insulting the very object spinning sharp-edged thunder 2 arm lengths from your face. Soon enough the rhythm takes you over. Lift, pour, listen, check the feed, empty the chest, sort the finer from the coarser, answer a question, sweep a drift of spill, lift again. The body learns this music until the hours begin to pass not by the sun but by repeated motions. Monastery bells may mark terce or sext in the distance, but here you know time by the filling of one meal chest, then another, by the gradual ache under your shoulder blades, by the flour whitening your cuffs past the wrist. At some point Hamo's sack is finished, measured out, and returned to him in meal. He hefts it with a grunt and gives you a final nod, less suspicious now than when he arrived. Trust is too grand a word. Let us say he leaves less ready to accuse you in public. For a miller, that is a pleasant sort of blessing. And still the wheel turns, the river presses, the stones murmur and growl, and you remain where all their voices meet, keeping the great machine of morning from slipping into chaos by no more glamorous magic than attention. Morning has now fully taken hold, though the light inside the mill remains filtered and pale, strained through shutters, dust, and old boards until it seems less like sunlight and more like something ground down with the grain. The room is warmer than it was at dawn, not warm in any generous sense, but warmed by effort, by bodies waiting their turn, by the patient heat of stone doing its work. Flour has settled over your sleeves and hands so thoroughly that your own skin seems half remade. It gathers in the lines of your knuckles, pales the hairs on your wrists, and turns every touch ghostly. You brush one hand against your tunic and only succeed in drawing a brighter streak across the darker wool. This is the part of the day when the work grows more exact. The great wheel may turn and the stones may grind with a force that feels almost grand, but grandeur is not what occupies you now. Now it is texture, measure, and fairness. Now it is the narrow kingdom ruled by scoops, scales, fingers, and eyes. The meal chest fills, and you crouch beside it. Take a handful, and let it pour from one palm into the other in a pale stream. The finer flower slips softly, almost silky by the rough standards of this world. Coarser meal falls with a little more body to it, with the faintest rasp. Bran clings differently. You learn these differences the way a shepherd learns wool or a brewer learns foam. You do not merely see flour, you feel what it will become. Alice's rye is next to be sorted, and rye has its own stubborn temperament, darker, heavier, less eager to pretend to delicacy. It makes bread with character, which is a polite way of saying it makes bread capable of surviving conversation with winter. You sift part of it through a coarse bolting cloth stretched over a wooden frame. The finer flour gathers below, dusky and soft. The rougher particles remain behind, meant for heartier loaves, pottage, or the endless practical feeding of people who cannot afford to be particular. Alice watches this process with the stern concentration of a woman who has measured out too many lean seasons to be charmed by craftsmanship alone. "That much fine," she says. "That much." She narrows her eyes. "Last spring I had more." "Last spring you had better rye." "Last spring I had fewer hens as well, and no one improved matters by pointing it out." You incline your head, because she is correct, and because Alice has the sort of authority that does not require office. Widows often acquire it. They speak less for effect and more from economy, and everyone knows that arguing with them is like wrestling a door hinge, noisy, exhausting, and doomed to end with you feeling foolish. You lift the measure and weigh her due with care. This is where every family, every temper, every private anxiety passes through your dusty hands. Flour is not abstract. It is loaves counted in the mind before they exist. It is children fed, workers sustained, a feast stretched, a fast endured, a week survived. When people watch your scales, they are not merely watching a trade. They are watching tomorrow's bread. The beam of the balance trembles, settles, and trembles again. You shift a little from one side to the other. The iron weight has worn smooth where generations of fingers have handled it. The wooden scoop has darkened with age and grease from hands, but its rim is polished bright in places from constant use. Medieval objects become intimate by service. They do not stay pristine enough to admire from a distance. They earn their place by being worn into trust. Alice takes back her measure at last with a grunt that means satisfaction dragged reluctantly into daylight. That is nearly affection from her. She ties her sack, braces herself, and leaves with it over one shoulder, her shawl powdered at the edge where it brushed the meal chest. The little cloud she carries out with her seems to follow like a blessing the mill grants to everyone equally, whether wanted or not. More villagers step in as others leave, and the line never quite disappears. A cooper's wife with barley. Two brothers from a holding near the marsh with oats and identical suspicious expressions, as though mistrust runs in their blood more strongly than height. A servant from the manor grange, bringing wheat that has been kept drier and cleaner than most because the Lord's bread must, naturally, rise closer to heaven than everyone else's. You take the wheat more carefully. Fine white flour is rare enough here to feel almost ceremonial. It is what richer households prize for feast bread, for small manchet loaves, for the delicate baking that allows noble tables to pretend that labour and mud are unfortunate rumours from another kingdom. The wheat pours pale gold into the hopper, the stones answer with their usual deep agreement. When the flour comes through, it is lighter than the rye, finer, almost elegant. You rub it between finger and thumb and feel the difference immediately. This is flour that clings softly, that almost melts under the pressure of skin. The servant watches you with that tiresome calm, peculiar to people carrying someone else's authority. "Mind it stays clean," he says. You look at him, at the flour dust floating visibly through the air, at the timbers, the sacks, the boots, the river mud drying near the door. "I shall command the entire world to behave itself." He blinks once, uncertain whether this is insolence. Because he serves the manner and you serve necessity, he decides not to pursue the matter. Some swear noble grain yields more because it has heard better prayers over the fields. Others say land close to the manor is simply better dunged and better guarded. Even now, it is hard to tell whether privilege appears holier because it shines, or shines because enough hands keep polishing it. In any case, the wheat is good, and you give it its due attention. Flour like this can cause a quarrel faster than ale if it comes back short. You set aside the finest portion, then the next, then the coarser remainder. Nothing is wasted. Nothing can be. The world beyond this mill is full of want dressed in ordinary clothes. Bran goes to porridge, to dark bread, to animals when fortune is kind, and to people when fortune is not. A rich table may choose. Most tables merely receive. By now your arms carry a steady heaviness that no longer feels like strain so much as condition. Lift, tilt, level, weigh, tie, sweep. Your shoulders know the pattern without consulting you. A fine pale layer coats the front of your tunic completely. When you wipe your forehead with the back of your wrist, you leave a white mark there too, as though some absent-minded monk has begun illuminating you and then wandered off for dinner. The boy from earlier, now emboldened by long observation, points and says, "You look like an old loaf." His mother hushes him, but you say, "That is still kinder than what the mirror would report." A few people laugh. The laughter is soft, not because the joke is magnificent, but because the room is full of tired people who know that any humour before midday must be handled gently, like a cracked cup. Between customers you sweep spilled flour and meal back from the edges where it has drifted. The broom whispers over the boards. You check the sacks, knot cords, and mark in memory who has brought what and what remains to be done. Memory is half your trade, perhaps more. If you confuse a family's share, or forget what was fine and what was coarse, the mistake does not vanish into theory. It sits at supper glaring at everyone. Outside, the village morning has broadened. Through the open door you glimpse a cart passing on the road beyond. Hear geese complaining near the water. Catch the smell of smoke from cottages where pottage is surely bubbling by now. Somewhere distant, a church bell calls again, thin in the open air. It weaves through the grinding sound and seems for a moment to bless the whole dusty business. No one who has not stood here quite understands how much of village peace depends on these little judgments. Not only whether grain becomes flour, but whether it becomes enough, whether the miller seems fair, whether the scales stand straight, whether one household quietly suspects another got the better measure. Bread may be baked in cottages, but it begins in suspicion here. And so your hands, pale now to the wrist, keep moving from meal chest to scale, from sack to scoop, from fine to coarse and back again, while each person who waits at the edge of the dust reads your face for signs of honesty, skill, or theft. The morning deepens around you, and the mill goes on turning grain into flour and watchfulness into habit, one measured portion at a time. By the time the sun has climbed high enough to bleach the mist from the river entirely, the mill has taken on that full late morning feeling of labour settled into its groove. The first chill has gone from your fingers, replaced by the dull heat of work, and the ache in your shoulders has ceased being a complaint and become a fact, as familiar and unremarkable as the wheel turning outside. Dust hangs in the light, rye, barley and wheat have all passed through your hands. Villagers have come and gone, leaving behind footprints in the mud, stray kernels on the boards, and little pockets of muttered dissatisfaction that hover in the air as stubbornly as flour itself. This is the hour when grumbling ripens. It begins, as many medieval discomforts do, with toll. A mill does not run on goodwill. The Lord's right must be observed, the miller's portion accounted for, custom obeyed whether loved or not. Everyone knows it. Everyone resents it. Bread may be a blessing, but the road from grain to loaf is paved with deductions. You lift the next sack and feel at once that it is lighter than the owner wishes it were. Its owner, Bran, stands nearby with both hands tucked into his belt, his expression already arranged into careful offence before a single grain has been measured. Bran is one of those men who seem convinced the world is engaged in a private conspiracy to deprive them specifically. Sometimes men like that are wrong. Sometimes they are merely born early into peasant life and develop excellent instincts. Not much this time, he says. Not much in the sack. You answer, there was more before threshing. There always is. A few of the waiting villagers allow themselves the briefest ghost of a smile. Bran does not. He watches as you open the sack, dip the scoop, and test the grain. Oats, clean enough, though a little thin. You feel the dryness, hear the faint hollow rattle of lighter kernels, and know before you even begin what sort of yield this will give. Poor harvests announce themselves long before the baking. Bran says, take no more than custom. I rarely take less than custom, you say. That wins you a snort from the cooper's wife by the hearth, and even Bran's mouth twitches, though he tries to suppress it for the sake of dignity. In truth, the joke lands because everyone in the room knows exactly where the sore spot lies. The miller's toll is accepted with the same grace people reserve for cold rain on laundry day. Necessary. Perhaps. Welcome. Never. You measure carefully. Bran leans in as though his eyes might tip the balance. The beam settles, and you separate what is due. Nothing dramatic happens. No one gasps. No angel descends to certify the fairness of the transaction. Medieval life is nearly always disappointing in its refusal to provide theatrical proof. Instead, there is just the scrape of the scoop, the thud of grain into the proper vessel, and Bran's quiet exhale when he sees that you have not, in fact, ground his children directly into the Lord's account. He says, this is what trust sounds like in a village. The room smells now not only of flour but of people growing hungry. Morning bread has long since vanished into work. Stomachs are beginning to notice the distance to supper. Hunger makes everyone more attentive to toll, to fairness, to whether their meal looks hearty enough to imagine as loaves. It makes the smallest subtraction feel theological. Outside the door, the river keeps on with its own bright indifference. Sunlight flashes on the moving surface. A cart rattles past toward the market road, wheels spraying old mud at the verge. Somewhere across the fields, a dog barks at nothing a dog can later explain. From farther off still comes the faint clang of a bell, likely from the priory marking the noon office. Monks are preparing to pray while here in the mill the rest of the valley prepares to eat, complain, or both. You finally allow yourself a pause. It is not much of one. Medieval labour does not often hand out proper intermissions with cushions and fruit. But the line has thinned for a moment. The hopper is steady, and you can step to the side bench by the wall where your midday meal waits under a cloth. You sit, and the boards beneath you creak with the familiar protest of old timber. Your legs are grateful in the blunt, unsentimental way legs are grateful when granted a moment's truce. The meal is plain enough to be almost philosophical coarse bread, a bit of hard cheese, an onion, and a small jug of ale. No roasted peacock, no sugared marchpane castle, no noble cook sweating over saffron sauces while pages carry silver dishes into a hall. Just bread cut with a knife that has sharpened itself against years of use, cheese firm enough to resist your first effort, and ale with that honest, faintly sour taste that suggests the brewer considered perfection a vanity. You bite into the bread and let the heaviness of it settle in you. Coarse bread has a sort of moral seriousness. It does not flatter, it does not melt. It reminds you that grain, once milled, still has one more indignity ahead before it becomes a meal. The cheese follows, salty and dry. The onion clears the head so briskly it feels almost medicinal. Some swear a raw onion at midday keeps away ague and evil alike. Others say it merely keeps away conversation, which can be just as helpful. Alice, who has returned briefly because she forgot the smaller sack of coarser meal by the wall, sees you eating and says, "Feast day, is it? You hold up the onion, only for bishops." She gives a short approving hum and lifts her sack again. Eat while you can. Men argue worse when they smell another man's bread. That is the foundation of most politics. She leaves before having to admit you are right. The cooper's wife steps forward next with barley and a complaint prepared so carefully it might as well be wrapped in linen. "Last time," she says, "my husband said the meal seemed damp." You chew, swallow, and say, "Then your husband was either wrong or storing it badly." She folds her arms. "He's not often wrong." "Then you're storing it badly." This earns a soft laugh from one of the waiting brothers near the door, and the woman herself nearly smiles before catching the expression and setting it aside. In villages, humour and annoyance often arrive arm in arm. She watches you finish your bread as if measuring whether a man who eats so simply can truly be accused of luxury by toll. The answer, plainly, is yes. A miller occupies that inconvenient rung above bare subsistence where everyone below suspects comfort and everyone above sees only dust. You rise again, brush flour from your knees, and return to the scales. The day's toll is not merely grain set aside, it is also memory, responsibility, and risk. What is taken must be kept apart and accounted for. Some will go where custom demands, to the Lord's due or the manor stores. Some remains as your right, though even a rightful portion acquires a guilty look when others are hungry. No one can quite agree whether millers were truly as prosperous as the old tales mutter, or whether people simply cannot forgive any neighbour whose livelihood depends on handling everyone else's food. There are stories of fat millers cheating widows and laughing into their cups. There are also plenty of actual millers who end their days with bad lungs, sore backs, and roofs as leaky as everyone else's. Legend prefers a villain. Timber and water prefer a tired man with a broom. You sought another measure, fine and coarse. Due and returned, the beam trembles, settles, and makes its little wooden judgment. Bran's oats are done, the cooper's barley goes in next, then another small sack from a cotter who apologizes for the poor quality before you have even untied it. Hunger teaches apology too early. By now the sound of the wheel has become so constant that silence would feel like a wound. The stones grind steadily beneath the floor, turning all grievance into meal with a patience none of the humans in the room can match. Dust curls in the sunbeams. The hearth has burned low. The room smells of grain, warm wood, onion skin, damp wool drying by slow degrees, and the human nearness of people waiting on food. You finish the last swallow of ale and set the jug aside. The brief rest fades from your limbs almost at once, but leaves behind enough strength to continue. That is the usual shape of comfort here small, practical, and gone before anyone can become spoiled by it. Then another complaint rises from near the door, this one about dues at the market toll on the far road, and the room answers with a dozen weary opinions. Soon they are all muttering again about lords, roads, bridges, grain, rain, and the mathematical mystery by which every season produces less than hoped and costs more than expected. You let the talk flow around you while your hands go on with the work. A miller hears half the village's grievances before dinner and is expected to solve none of them, which may be the one true luxury of the profession. So the midday hour passes in bread, measurement, and murmured resentment, while you stand in the flour-dusted centre of it all, taking the toll that keeps the mill alive and enduring the grumbling that proves everyone else intends to be. Midday loosens its grip slowly, not with any noble flourish, but by thinning the line at the door and softening the edge of the complaints. One by one the villagers go off with their sacks of meal and their opinions still warm. The room grows quieter, though never truly quiet. The wheel keeps turning outside with that deep wet groan of faithful labour, and the stones beneath the casing continue their patient thunder. But the human part of the noise ebbs for a while. What remains is the river, the machinery, the small hearth settling into red coals, and the kind of silence that lets old beliefs creep back into the corners. You step out into the light at last, carrying the crust of your noon bread and the last bite of cheese, and stand beside the river bank where the damp grass shines under the pale sun. The air feels cooler out here after the flour-thick warmth of the mill. It smells of water, mud, willow bark, and that green, living scent rivers have even in colder months, as though they are forever whispering of spring to anyone foolish enough to believe them. The wheel turns beside you, each paddle lifting silver streams before dropping them back into the current. A little spray catches your sleeve. The flour there turns to paste in tiny white freckles. You eat standing up, looking over the water. This is where the tales gather. Mills sit at edges between village and field, between land and river, between what can be counted and what can only be feared after sunset. People bring grain here, but they also bring rumour, charms, warnings, old scraps of belief handed down with wooden spoons and cracked cups. Some swear water spirits hate iron nails driven too near the bank, and will answer by swelling the stream when least desired. Some swear a sprig of rowan above the mill door keeps bad luck from entering with the grain. Others insist the true danger is not spirits at all but envy, which slips in more quietly and spoils things just as effectively. You have, above the lintel of the side door, a little dried bundle of herbs tied with faded thread. No one remembers exactly who hung it there. It has been there longer than your own time at the mill, perhaps longer than the last miller's. Mugwort, maybe, or vervain, or simply whatever was at hand when someone wished to make a gesture against misfortune and had no better weapon. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such things work by blessing the place or by comforting the people who must work in it. From farther along the bank comes the shuffle of feet through the reeds. You turn and see old Edric, the fisherman, making his way up from the ford with a basket over one arm and a cloak that smells faintly of river silt no matter the season. He is one of those men who always looks as if he has just heard a secret and found it mildly disappointing. His face is all lines and weather, his beard more grey than brown, and his boots are permanently damp in a way no leather should be asked to endure. You listen to it too much, he says by way of greeting, nodding toward the wheel. You smell a fish too much, you answer. This seems to satisfy him as proper civility. He lowers himself onto a stump near the bank and stretches his knees with the careful sound of a man whose joints have become independent thinkers. River ran strange before dawn. It ran wet before dawn as well. I noticed that too. He squints at you, downstream. I mean, eddies where they should not be. That earns a glance from you, not because you are alarmed, but because men who have lived by one stretch of water half their lives can tell when it has changed its mind. Edric spits into the grass, not rudely, just in conversation with the earth. My mother used to say the river does that when someone has offended the saints, or stolen from the Ford Cross. Your mother blamed saints for nearly everything. She lived long. That proves only that the saints were patient. He gives a dry little laugh, then reaches into the basket and produces 2 small smoked fish wrapped in cloth. For trade, he says, if you have meal to spare later. You nod. Nothing in village life moves by coin alone. Trade drifts around the edges of custom like smoke around beams. Fish for meal, candle stubs for eggs, a favour now for a favour remembered at lambing. The written world belongs to scribes and manor rolls. The real world often runs on memory and eye contact. Edric sits a little longer, watching the current slide past the wheel. You heard what Maud said. I hear too much of what Maud says. She claims there is something in the pool below the bend. Not a pike. Too clever for that. Maud also claims her 3rd cousin was cured of toothache by touching a pilgrim badge to a goose. That part may be true. No one can quite agree whether that makes the badge miraculous or the goose unusually gifted. Edric gives a grunt that might be amusement. All the same, folk are crossing themselves at the ford. You look downstream where the water darkens under overhanging branches. It is an ordinary enough place by daylight, though ordinary places do splendid work in breeding nonsense. A deep pool, a leaning alder, roots like fingers clutching the bank, a place where the current slows and turns. By dusk it will seem to invite stories. By moonlight it will seem to demand them. Medieval people do not separate the practical from the uncanny as sharply as later ages pretend to. A woman may know exactly how to salt pork, mend a torn sleeve, and set a broken finger with splints, while also refusing to whistle near the river after dark because some things are not worth inviting. A man may sharpen ploughshares with perfect common sense and still tuck a saint's token into the stable beam against elf shot. Leechcraft, herbs, prayer, charms, and bitter experience all share the same shelf, more or less. The world is dangerous enough that one does not throw away a possible remedy simply because it sounds odd. You finish your bread and brush the crumbs from your palm. Across the field beyond the road, a little shrine stands under a thorn tree, just a painted board under a sloped cover, with a faded image of the Virgin and a cup for offerings. Someone has left a twist of wool there, red against the weathered wood, for a vow, perhaps, or thanks, or because a child was feverish and a mother wished to bargain with heaven in whatever currency she possessed. Some swear wool offered at roadside shrines keeps away sudden illness when carried home again. Others say that is nonsense, and yet the wool continues to appear. Back inside the mill, the dimness feels close after the open bank. The dust has settled a little in your absence. The stones still turn, though the hopper is nearly empty for the moment. You move through the room, checking what can be checked: the feed shoe, the chute, the chest, the cord on one sack that has worked loose. Ordinary gestures, sensible gestures, but the talk with Edric lingers, as such talk always does. Rivers invite thoughts no broom can quite sweep away. On the shelf by the hearth sits a little clay cup containing salt and fennel seed. The last miller used to cast a pinch into the water at the start of every winter month. Against rot, he said, against spite, against things seen and unseen. You never fully adopted the habit, but neither have you emptied the cup. That is how belief often survives here, not by conviction, but by reluctance to insult possibility. A shadow passes the doorway, and for a moment you think another customer has come. It is only the dog that has been haunting the yard since dawn, a rangy brown creature with one torn ear and the mournful dignity of an animal that belongs to no one and yet evaluates everyone. It pauses on the threshold, sniffs, and settles against the outer wall in a patch of weak sun as if appointed there by fate. You at least don't argue about told you tell it. The dog opens one eye, considers you unworthy of reply, and sleeps again. Outside, the river keeps its old patient song. Inside, the mill answers in wood and stone. Between the two you stand, as ever, with one hand on the reel and one hand near the realm of rumour, because that is how life goes here by the water. Grain must be ground, sacks tied, measures kept fair, and still, all around the labour, the old beliefs drift and cling like damp wool, making even the plainest afternoon feel touched by something half-remembered, half-imagined, and impossible to dismiss entirely. The quieter stretch after midday never lasts as long as it seems it should. A mill has a way of filling itself again, not only with grain but with duty. By the time the sun has shifted westward enough to turn the river from white gold to a darker, steadier gleam, the practical world comes knocking once more, and this time it wears the face of authority. You hear him before you see him, not a cart this time, but the measured tread of a man who expects doors to open without needing to announce himself twice. Then the shadow falls across the threshold, and in steps Odo, the manor reeve, wrapped in a dark wool cloak with the damp still shining at the hem. He is not tall, but he has the compact, self-contained look of someone who has spent years carrying lists in his head and grievances in his sleeves. A strip of leather binds his tunic at the waist. A small wax tablet case hangs from his belt beside a knife and a ring of keys that jingle with just enough ceremony to suggest that keys, as ever, are a sort of performance. The room changes slightly when he enters. No one bows. This is not a lord in fur and riding gloves, but backs grow straighter, voices lower. Even the waiting villagers, who complain of dues with athletic commitment when no official is present, suddenly discover great interest in the grain at their feet. The reeve stands in that narrow middle world medieval villages produce so well, not noble, not humble, but entrusted with the unpleasant mathematics linking the two. He is the manor's memory when the manor wishes not to forget. Odo, you say. Miller. This again, Ray, counts as warmth. He steps farther in, glances toward the meal chest, the sacks stacked by the wall, the scales, the flour dust on the boards, the turning casing over the stones. His eye is practiced. He does not merely look, he inventories. Somewhere in his head he is already aligning visible fact with expected custom. A reeve's gift is to make ordinary objects feel as though they are testifying. Water runs well, he says. Well enough to keep us all from eating bark. A mercy? You're never entirely sure whether Odo possesses a sense of humour, or merely allows it short supervised outings. He unfastens the little tablet case and draws out a smooth wax board with marks already impressed upon it. A stylus follows. Here it is. Then the part of the day where your labour must become account. Grain might pass through the mill as dust and transformation, but somewhere beyond the dust the manor wants numbers, portions, proof. The Lord may never stand where you stand, may never breathe flour or hear the stones thunder under his feet, but he expects his rites to arrive with the precision of sunrise. Around you, the wheel turns on, indifferent to administration. Odo comes nearer the scales, the customary portion from manor tenants. Set aside. You have it separate. You think I stir the Lord's due into widow's rye for sport. He gives you a flat look. I think men become inventive when grain is plentiful and more inventive when it is not. That is difficult to argue with. No one can quite agree whether medieval corruption begins with greed or simply with the fact that hunger makes philosophers of everyone and saints of almost no one. You gesture to the sacks kept to one side, tied with cord of a different twist from the village's own. Odo crouches, examines the knots, the chalk marks, the weight by the look of them. He presses a palm to one and judges by feel, as you do, though from the opposite side of trust. He rises, and the wheat from the grange, bolted finer, separate as well. Good. That one word carries an unreasonable amount of relief, though you would not admit it aloud. There is nothing dramatic in these inspections, yet they tighten a man from the inside. A miller is watched from below by villagers afraid of being cheated, and from above by the manor afraid of being denied. Useful to all, trusted by none that is the narrow bridge you walk every day, and it has no handrail. The cooper's wife, still waiting on the last of her barley, shifts her sack with unnecessary noise. Odo's glance flicks toward her. Any complaints? A dangerous question. It lands in the room like a pebble in still water. She sets her mouth. Not today. This from a woman who could locate a complaint inside a wedding blessing. You almost thank her. Odo makes a mark in the wax. Remarkable. There is time yet, you say. That earns, from him, the smallest exhale through the nose. In another man it might be laughter. In Odo it is practically song. He moves with you to the side where the Lord's toll sacks stand. The manor court sits next week, he says. There will be questions on grain yield. There are always questions on grain yield. There are more in years when men suspect the harvest lied to them. And what answer does the manor prefer? The true one, polished if possible. There speaks the reeve entire. Truth is wanted, certainly, but not naked. Dressed a little. Combed. Made fit to sit at table beside obligation. You know what next week's court will be like without attending it tenants in worn cloaks, caps in hand, shifting in the hall beneath soot-black rafters while the steward or bailiff hears disputes over strips of land. Pigs in wrong fields, hedges cut too close, dues unpaid, and someone inevitably insisting a boundary stone moved in the night by mischief, human or otherwise. There will be damp rushes underfoot, cold draughts from the door, the smell of wool and old ink, and men pretending not to fear the outcome while fearing it with all their might. Your trade always leads there eventually. Flour may seem softer than law, but it reaches the same table. Odo looks around the mill again. You keep it tolerably. Tolerably is generous. The axle complained last month. It still complains. I simply complain back. He runs a thumb along a beam where flour has gathered thickly. You should have the carpenter see the support before autumn rains. I should also acquire a chest of silver and a choir of angels, but the week is proving crowded. Ask the manor for timber. You raise an eyebrow, and be granted it before my grandchildren retire to a monastery. A murmur passes through the room, quickly swallowed. Even Odo's mouth almost changes shape. Ask anyway, he says. Refusing a request is easier for them when none has been made. That, annoyingly, is sensible. Outside. A cloud passes over the sun and the light in the mill dims. The air takes on that dusty amber gloom again, flour motes turning slower in the shafts from the shutters. Someone near the door pulls a cloak tighter. The dog in the yard thumps once against the wall and resettles. In the distance, faint but unmistakable. A bell sounds from across the fields and abbey or priory, marking the hour with the steady confidence only monastic life can sustain. Here, time is carried less by bells than by burdens, but the bell still threads through everything, as if to remind you that while grain is being weighed and manor rites inspected, somewhere men in cowls are standing in ordered rows telling heaven about it. Odo finishes his notes. The stylus scratches softly in the wax. A little insect sound against all the wood and stone. He closes the tablet, tucks it away, and lets the keys at his belt fall back into place. A tanner on the south track says the ford is soft again. It was soft last week. It is softer. The river takes a personal interest in commerce. Then persuade it to pursue another hobby. Some swear reeves are born without mirth and acquire only enough to survive winter. Yet that almost counts as a joke. You nod toward the sacks. Will men come for the manor portion before dusk? Tomorrow at first light. So tonight those sacks remain under your watch too. Another small responsibility. Another reason to sleep lightly in the loft. A miller's authority is narrow, but it is real in these walls. You control the order of grinding, the fairness of measure, the keeping apart of what belongs to whom. People resent it because they must. Still, for all their suspicion, they also depend on you to keep the world from turning entirely to mud and whole grain. That is the strange seat you occupy, not lord, not peasant exactly, not merely craftsman, not merely servant, necessary enough to matter, exposed enough to worry. Some swear millers are sly because they stand too close to everyone's hunger. Others say they are simply practical men who have learned that smiling too broadly around grain invites accusation. Even now, it is hard to tell whether your narrow authority belongs to you, to the manor, to the river, or to the stones themselves. Odo steps to the door and pauses there, outlined against the paling afternoon. Send word if the support beam worsens. I will send word when it falls on someone important. He gives you one last flat glance, which in him may be affection wearing armour, then departs along the muddy track toward the village, cloak lifting a little in the breeze. The room exhales after he's gone. Shoulders loosen. The cooper's wife mutters something unflattering about officials and their shoes. One of the brothers snorts. Speech returns to ordinary temperature. And you, standing again in the flower-thick air with the wheel turning and the scales waiting, feel the old truth settle once more over your shoulders. The mill is yours to manage, but never entirely yours to command. It belongs partly to the village, partly to the manor, partly to the river that grants it life, and partly to the long habit of work itself. Your authority lives only in that fragile balance, held like the beam of the scale, steady when watched. Wavering the moment a hand forgets its duty. The reeve's footsteps have barely faded into the damp road when the mill seems to remember it is made not of custom and wax tablets, but of wood, rope, peg, and strain. Authority leaves, maintenance remains. This is the truer rhythm of most days. Men with keys and obligations come and go, but the beams stay, the wheel turns, and every part of the place slowly conspires to wear itself out beneath your hands. You stand still a moment in the dusty light and listen. There it is, not the great familiar rumble of the stones, nor the steady groan of the wheel answering the river, but a smaller sound threaded beneath them, a dry ticking knock, irregular, shy at first, then more certain, the sort of sound that asks to be ignored until it grows large enough to demand a prayer, a carpenter, and perhaps a burial. You tilt your head. The cooper's wife is still tying her sack. One of the brothers lingers near the door. Neither hears it. Or if they do, They are wisely pretending not to, because once a stranger notices trouble in a mill, he will spend the rest of the season telling everyone he witnessed its doom personally. You move to the gearing and lay a palm against the timber frame. The vibration is strong and familiar, but every few breaths there comes that little knock again. Peg against looseness, most likely, or a belt not sitting quite as it ought. Mills are full of parts that behave admirably until they decide, without warning or apology, to cultivate personality. You wait until the last customer has gone. Better not to dismantle anything with an audience unless you enjoy advice from people whose experience of machinery begins and ends with dropping spoons. Soon enough, the room is yours again, save for the dog outside and the river beyond the wall. Flour settles slowly through the air like pale weather. You shut the door against the draught, wipe your hands on your tunic, and set about the afternoon's less celebrated labour. First, the hopper must be run down. No sense stopping the stones with grain still feeding badly through. You ease the flow and let the last of the meal drop away into the chest. The grinding changes tone as the kernels thin, from full-body growl to a rougher, emptier mutter. Then you move to the sluice and reduce the water, not fully off, only enough to slacken the wheel and bring the motion down from roaring necessity to a tired, reluctant turn. The whole mill seems to sigh as it slows. The silence that follows is never complete. Water still moves, wood still settles, but compared with the thunder of full grinding, the hush feels almost intimate. And in that hush the troublesome knock becomes obvious. A collar peg in the upright shaft, worn a little loose. Not disastrous yet, but on good terms with disaster if left to enjoy itself. You crouch, squint, and press at it with your thumb. The timber gives just enough to sour your mood. That is the way of repair work. The problem is always smaller than your annoyance and larger than your comfort. You fetch the tools from the peg rack by the wall, a wooden mallet dark with old handling, an iron drift, a short knife, a coil of cord, a pot of grease rendered from animal fat and mixed with soot until it resembles a substance no sensible person would spread near food, yet which keeps axles and fittings from grinding themselves into sermons. There is also the mill bill for dressing stones, but that ugly little weapon may rest for now. You're not sharpening the stones this afternoon, only persuading the rest of the mechanism not to imitate old bones. The peg comes free after a stubborn argument. You inspect it in the light from the shutter, worn smooth at one side, compressed where repeated strain has worried it day after day. Nothing dramatic, just years condensed into damage. Medieval things rarely fail in theatrical fashion at first. They fail by inches, by fraying, by leaning, by acquiring a tone in the morning that was not there last week. Some swear houses and mills age like people, first complaining at the joints and only later collapsing into full indignity. Others swear timber simply remembers the forest and never quite forgives being made useful. You shave a sliver from a scrap of hardwood and wedge it with the peg before driving both back into place. Tap, test, tap again. The sound changes. Better. Not perfect, but better is the common triumph of this century. Perfect belongs to heaven, manuscripts, and lies told by merchants. Next comes the belt, a leather strap that passes its duty from one turning part to another, has slipped just enough to chafe where it should glide. You reach up, fingers stretching, and pull it into truer alignment. Dust shakes down into your hair. The beam above smells of old leather, hot wood, and that strange dry scent of flour worked into every surface by years. Your shoulder protests. Your back joins in immediately, not wishing to be excluded from the conversation. You grunt, because elegance is wasted on practical suffering. No one sings while doing this. However many paintings later centuries may commission, labour in tight timber spaces is mostly muttering, lifting, and being personally insulted by knots. When the peg is set and the belt adjusted, you turn to the chute where meal falls away from the stones. A crust of old residue has gathered there, dampened at some point and dried again into a stubborn ridge. Left alone, it will catch fresh meal and turn a minor nuisance into a clog, and a clog into an hour of bad language spoken inwardly, while customers pretend not to hear. You scrape it clean with the knife, then brush the whole length with a handful of dry straw. The straw whispers over the wood, pale dust gathers at your boots. You sweep it aside. Outside, the light has shifted noticeably. The fiercest part of afternoon has passed. Sun reaches lower across the yard, touching the dog's brown back until it glows a little at the edges. From the ford comes the rattle of a passing cart and the murmur of voices. Travellers, perhaps, or villagers heading home from some neighbouring holding. Their presence remains out beyond the mill for now. Here, within these walls, the work has narrowed to you, the timber, and all the little betrayals age tries to stage. You fetch a sack that needs mending next. Its seams split earlier under the weight of barley and had to be tied closed in haste. Now you sit on the low stool by the hearth and run cord through the torn edge with a bone needle thick enough to shame finer crafts. The coarse weave scrapes your fingers. This too belongs to millwork, not only grinding but preserving all the humble containers without which no grain, no meal, no fairness can be carried home. A broken sack is a small disaster and a large embarrassment. It spills value in plain sight. As you stitch, you notice again the smell of the place settling around you once the stones are mostly quiet, damp wool drying near the wall. Grease on wood, cold ash in the hearth, old straw, river air pushing under the door, and flour everywhere, always flour. Sweet and dry and faintly alive. It gets into your cuffs, your boots, the creases by your nose, the corners of the room, the cracks in the floorboards, the dog's fur if he naps too near the threshold, and probably the reeve's soul if he stands here long enough. Some swear millers carry flour in their lungs to the grave. Looking at the pale film on your hands, you find that hard to dispute. When the sack is mended, you rise and go out to the wheel itself. The paddles are still turning slowly under the reduced flow, lifting and falling with heavy dignity. Moss clings to the shaded side of the lower timbers. You crouch near the bearing, careful of the wet stone, and pack a little more grease where wood meets strain. Cold water sprays your wrist. The river does not care for your comfort. It never has. Yet without it, you're only a man with sacks and worry. With it, the whole place lives. A flock of small birds lifts suddenly from the reeds upstream, scattering like loosened ash. For a moment the world is all wings and late light. Then they settle again, and the ordinary day returns. You stand, wipe your hands on a rag, and look over the mill as a carpenter might look over a chair. He has no time to rebuild support beam still holding. Belt truer now, chute clean, peg secured, sack mended, grease renewed, stone, sweat, and small repairs. No song will be written about any of it. Still, this is how the place survives, not by miracle, nor by lordly attention, but by 100 little interventions performed before failure grows theatrical. Inside once more, you open the sluice a little wider and let the wheel gather itself. Water takes hold. The paddles bite. The axle turns with renewed certainty. Then the gears answer. The stones begin their great low murmur again, and the mill, freshly coaxed into obedience, resumes its work as if it had never considered betraying you at all. By late afternoon, the light has changed from labouring brightness to something more slant and thoughtful, as if the day itself is beginning to tire. The mill, freshly coaxed back into good behaviour, works with a steadier voice now. The troublesome knock has gone quiet. The wheel outside turns with renewed confidence, and the stones have resumed their deep, full murmur beneath the floorboards. Dust rises once more in the old familiar shafts through the shutters, but the air feels less crowded than it did at midday. Most of the village has already come and gone. What remains now is the kind of traffic that belongs less to routine than to the road. You notice them first at the ford. From the doorway, while tying off a sack and brushing the last of the flour from your forearms, you see movement where the track dips toward the water. 2 figures, then a third, not villagers, not by the look of them. Their cloaks sit differently, with the loose practical drape of people who travel rather than live in one place. One leads a pack mule with panniers strapped over its back. Another carries a long staff polished smooth by use. They pause where the ground softens near the crossing, looking toward the wheel and the mill with the measuring curiosity of outsiders deciding whether this is a place for refreshment, trade, rumour, or trouble. The answer, as in most medieval settings, is yes. You step outside and lean one shoulder against the doorpost. The dog with the torn ear lifts its head from the patch of sunlight, squints at the newcomers, and decides they are not worth rising for. The river gives its usual green-brown glide below the wheel, and the late light catches in every dripping paddle. One traveller, a broad-shouldered man in a weather-dark cloak, guides the mule through first. The beast picks its way with a profound moral disappointment common to pack animals burdened by human plans. Behind him comes a thinner man whose hat bears a little lead pilgrim badge pinned to the brim, dulled by weather. Even at a distance you can make out the shape of crossed keys worked into the metal, perhaps for St. Peter, though the details are worn. The third traveller is a woman wrapped in a russet wool mantle, with a basket slung over one arm and shoes muddy enough to suggest either determination or poor judgment. They reach the far bank and stand a moment gathering themselves. The broad man raises a hand in greeting. Miller? Traveller? It is a generous word, less suspicious than stranger and less flattering than guest. He comes nearer, looking relieved to have reached something built by hands. People on the road begin to trust any permanent structure by evening, even one as draughty as a mill. Is there an alehouse in the village? There is an alehouse in the village, you say. Whether there is ale still in it depends on the day and the optimism of its owner. The woman laughs softly at that. The pilgrim merely shifts his staff and studies the wheel as though it might answer a private question. You grind late, he asks. When grain comes late, he nods, which is the nod of a man who has spent enough time with weather and roads to respect any work that cannot be postponed because the day feels tired. Travellers have a different smell from villagers, more leather, more horse, more stale smoke from unfamiliar hearths. Their cloaks carry rain from other parishes, dust from roads you have not walked, and the faint museum of places clinging to hems and straps. It is one of the quiet pleasures of a mill by a ford that news arrives with muddy boots. While the village brings you the same anxieties arranged in familiar faces, the road occasionally hands you other people's worries for comparison. The broad traveller asks whether the bridge on the North Road is passable. You tell him it is, unless the recent rain has persuaded it otherwise. The woman asks whether the priory bell they heard belongs to monks or canons. Monks, you think, though no one here has ever fully agreed on whether their discipline is stricter or merely advertised better. The pilgrim asks if the shrine beyond the fields is worth a stop. That depends, you say, on whether you seek blessings, shelter, or conversation with sheep. This time all three smile. Good. Tired travellers are easier company once reminded that the world has not entirely lost its sense of proportion. They linger by the mill rather than moving on at once, which is what people do when they sense useful information may be had for the price of politeness. The broad man, whose name turns out to be Martin, loosens the mule's strap and checks the load. He says he has come from a market town 2 days west, where merchants are already muttering over tolls and wool prices. The woman, called Isabel, has kin somewhere south of the Abbey lands and carries ribbons, needles, and small household goods in her basket to trade along the way. The pilgrim gives only his saint and destination, not his name, which is common enough. Roads make some people talkative and others protective of their stories. He is bound, he says, toward a church said to keep a relic that eases pain of the joints. At your age, Martin asks him. At any age, the pilgrim says, which is a fair answer and earns him a grunt of respect. You invite them no farther than the doorway, but that is invitation enough. They stand where the scent of flower meets the scent of evening air and look in at the machinery with the fascination all outsiders feel. A mill seems almost magical to anyone not condemned to sweep it. The gears overhead, the rumbling stones, the meal dust catching the light, the whole place alive with force borrowed from the river. It has an air of industry grander than daily life usually allows. Isabel peers toward the meal chests. Do folk here still bring most grain in kind, not coin? Folk here bring what they have, which is mostly complaints, you say to yourself, but not aloud. She notices the tied-off sack set separately by the wall. Lord's due. Part of it. In every village, Martin says, the Lord appears hungry. In every kingdom, you reply. That's perhaps bolder than wise, but the road loosens everyone's tongue by late afternoon. Besides, the reeve has already been and gone. The wolves have heard worse. The pilgrim steps closer to the doorway and touches the brim of his hat where the worn badge glints dull in the light. They said in one village north of here that mills are unlucky places to sleep. Only for men who snore and rats who hesitate. He studies you, uncertain whether that is answer enough. A widow I met swore the turning wheel draws wandering souls. Then they are no doubt better travelled than most of us. Some swear mills attract spirits because they stand always near running water and ceaseless motion. Some say ghosts prefer thresholds, and a mill is nothing if not a threshold grain to flour, river to labour, village to road. Others insist mills are only noisy enough that every draught, mouse, and loose board becomes a haunting by supper. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though they always tell it best after a second cup. The conversation drifts, as such conversations do, from roads to weather, from weather to harvest, from harvest to rumour. Martin heard of a barn fire near the eastern marsh. Isabel heard of a child cured of fever after being touched with oil from a lamp said to burn before a saint's relic. The pilgrim heard that a monastery farther south has begun refusing night lodging to men who arrive without a parish token, which sounds cruel enough to be true and pious enough to survive investigation. No one can quite agree whether such stories spread because the world is strange, or because roads make every village hungry for proof that somewhere else is stranger. You trade what news you have in return. The ford is soft. The manor court sits next week. The old fisherman claims the river eddies oddly below the bend. There is a suspicious monk at the priory guest house, or perhaps merely a monk with a suspicious face. The travellers accept all this as one accepts weather part useful, part unverifiable, wholly medieval. At length Martin unties a little bundle from the mule and offers a strip of dried apple in exchange for a drink of water and a moment's rest. You give them the water gladly enough. The apple you accept with interest. Dried fruit feels luxurious in the hand, like preserved sunlight someone has folded into leather. Isabel, in turn, sells you 2 stout needles finer than the bone one by your hearth, muttering that every household needs better tools than it admits. She is plainly right. The pilgrim leaves nothing but a blessing, traced lightly in the air toward the doorway as he turns to go. Whether he gives it to you, the mill, or the road ahead is uncertain. Soon they move on toward the village, their pace slower now that evening nears. The mule picks its way up the track. Martin's cloak catches the low light. Isabel's basket swings against her side. The pilgrim's badge flashes once and then dulls again. You watch them go until the bend in the road takes them out of sight. The dog settles his head back on his paws. The river keeps its old patient course. Inside the mill, the stones continue their labour. Yet for a little while, the world feels larger than your dusty walls. Roads have touched the ford, and with them have come other bells, other tolls, other superstitions, other markets, other weary jokes. Then the light lowers another degree, and the mill gathers you back into itself, with evening and work still waiting. The travellers have barely disappeared into the bend of the road when the light begins its slow surrender. Evening does not fall here all at once. It seeps in, soft and deliberate, like flour settling after a long disturbance. The bright edges of things dull first the wet gleam of the wheel, the sharp line of the doorframe, the glint on the river until everything takes on a warmer, deeper tone. Shadows stretch longer across the yard. The dog by the wall lifts his head, senses the shift, and resettles closer to the door as if the mill itself might offer better company than the cooling ground. Inside, the work eases into its final measures. There are still a few sacks to finish, though no more arrivals come down the muddy track. Those who needed flour today have had their turn, and those who did not will wait for morning, trusting either the mill or their hunger to hold steady through the night. You move with quieter purpose now. The urgency of midday has passed. What remains is completion, tidying, and the careful closing of a day that began in mist and uncertainty, and has somehow made its way into order. You lift the last measure of barley into the hopper and watch it fall, listening as always for any change in tone. The stones answer smoothly. Good. The repairs you made earlier have held. There is no hidden complaint rising from beam or peg. The mill, for now, is content to behave. You stand a moment longer than necessary, hand resting lightly on the casing, feeling the steady vibration through wood and bone. There is something almost companionable in it at this hour, as though the machinery, having been coaxed and corrected, now returns the favour by working without protest. Some swear that tools remember kindness, others say tools remember nothing at all, and it is only men who soften their thoughts toward what has not betrayed them yet, even now. It is hard to tell which is truer. The last of the meal falls into the chest below. You crouch and gather it, running your fingers through the fine flour and coarse remnants alike, separating what must be separated, measuring what must be measured. This final sorting is quieter than the earlier work. There are no watching eyes now, no murmured calculations from anxious villagers, only your hands, your memory, and the small judgments that ensure each household receives what it is owed, or what you believe it is owed, which in truth is the only measure that ever exists. You tie off the last sack with a firm knot and set it with the others, waiting for collection in the morning. The Lord's portion remains apart, as Odo required, its presence a quiet weight in the corner of your thoughts. That will leave your care at dawn, but for tonight it sits under your roof, a reminder that even in solitude you're not entirely alone in responsibility. The hopper empties fully. The stones begin to change their voice again, from full grinding to that hollow, restless murmur that signals their hunger for grain. You do not let them complain long. You step to the sluice and ease the water back once more. The wheel slows. The turning softens. The great rhythm of the day begins to unwind itself. The silence that follows is deeper than before. Not complete. Never complete, but deeper. Without the full labour of grinding, the mill feels larger, as though space has been returned to it. You hear the river more clearly now, its steady passage filling the gaps where the stones once roared. You hear the faint rustle of straw shifting underfoot. You hear your own breath, slower now, less strained. This is the hour for small order. You sweep the floor, gathering the day's scattered flour and grain into modest piles. Nothing of value is left to waste, though what you collect now will likely go to feed animals or thicken some humble pot. The broom whispers over the boards, tracing the shape of the day in pale arcs. Here where Bran stood, there where Alice rested her sack. A faint track near the door where the travellers paused, bringing the outside world with them in damp footprints that have now begun to dry and fade. You bank the hearth next, stirring the coals and adding a small piece of wood to keep a low warmth through the evening. The glow steadies, red and patient. Smoke curls upward and finds its familiar path into the rafters, joining the old layers that never quite leave. The smell is comforting now, less sharp than in the morning, more settled. On the bench, you gather your simple things, the knife, the cloth, the little jug. You take another small piece of bread, more out of habit than hunger, and chew slowly while you move about the room. The day's labour has taken the edge off your appetite, leaving behind a steady, quiet need rather than urgency. As the light fades further, you reach for the beeswax candle kept for evening use. It is not fine wax, nothing here is fine by noble standards, but it burns cleaner than tallow and carries a faint sweet scent that makes the air feel less burdened. You strike a spark and coax the wick to life. The flame steadies, small but certain, casting a warm circle that pushes back the growing dusk. Candlelight changes the mill. Where daylight reveals everything in practical detail, candlelight softens edges, deepens shadows, and gives even the most ordinary object a hint of something older, something half hidden. The beams above seem taller, the corners more secretive. The sacks by the wall take on the quiet dignity of stored abundance, even if that abundance is modest. You sit for a moment on the low stool by the hearth, letting the warmth reach your hands. Outside, the sky has begun to shift toward evening's deeper blue. A bird calls once, then again, then falls silent. The road beyond the mill grows still. The travellers will have reached the village by now, found their alehouse or their shelter, traded their stories for a place by someone else's fire. Here your fire is smaller, but it is yours. The dog at the door gives a soft huff and turns in a slow circle before settling again, closer now to the threshold, as if claiming the mill as his evening domain. You consider chasing him off, then decide against it. A quiet presence is no burden, and some swear a dog sleeping at the door keeps away more trouble than any charm hung above it. You glance once more at the sack set aside for morning. Each one holds a piece of the village's tomorrow. Bread, pottage, sustenance. You have touched them all today, measured them, judged them, carried them from grain to meal. It is a small authority, but a real one. The river continues its patient song beyond the wall, untroubled by your accounting or the manor's expectations. It flowed before the mill stood here. It will flow long after the beams have sagged and the stones have cracked, You borrow its strength for a time, shape it into labour, into flower, into life. Then you return it, unchanged, to its endless path. You rise at last and move to the door, stepping out into the cooling air. The sky above is deepening toward night, the first faint stars uncertain at the edges. The wheel stands nearly still now, water slipping past it with a softer voice. The yard smells of damp earth and wood, and the faint lingering trace of flour carried out on your clothes. You stand there a moment longer than needed, letting the quiet settle fully around you. The long, dusty day is not yet finished, but it has begun to fold itself inward, preparing for the slower, softer hours to come. With evening properly settled and the last useful daylight gone from the yard, the mill draws inward around its smaller concerns. Daytime belongs to sacks, villagers, water, and the visible business of grinding. Night belongs to reckoning, not grand reckoning, not the kind monks write about under headings involving sin and judgment, but the quieter arithmetic that keeps a working life from wandering into confusion. You light a second stub of candle from the first, more for steadiness than brightness, and set both where their glow can reach the bench by the hearth. The little pool of light gathers your tools, your hands, and the day's unfinished thoughts. On the bench lies the wax tablet you keep wrapped in cloth when it's not in use. It is not elegant. The wood is nicked, the edges darkened with handling, and the wax bears faint ghosts of earlier marks beneath the new smooth layer you pressed over it last week. Still, it serves. That is the rule most objects live by here. They need not be lovely. They need only endure. You take up the stylus and begin, not hurriedly, because errors made at candlelight have a talent for surviving into morning. One measure from Hamo, rye from Alice, Brand's thin oats, the cooper's wife and her suspicious barley, wheat from the manor grange, set apart as it must be. Then the smaller sacks, the ones most easily forgotten if you are careless, and therefore the most dangerous to leave only in memory. A cotter's poor grain, a widow's partial measure, a little owed in trade, a little promised back after market day. Numbers settle into the wax under your hand in neat practical scratches, and with each one the day feels less like a swirling cloud of flour and voices and more like something contained. You pause now and then to warm your fingers near the coals. The room has cooled since the stones fell quiet, not bitterly, but enough that the damp from outside begins to creep back into the boards and walls. Your hands still smell faintly of grain, leather, and axle grease despite the quick rinse you gave them in a basin by the door. Flour lives longer on the skin than one would think. It hides in the seams beside the nails, clings at the wrist, and leaves the whole day feeling written on you. The candlelight wavers gently when a draught slips through the shutter cracks. It makes the shadows move across the sacks lined by the wall. Lord's dew in one cluster, villagers' meal in another, your own small rite set aside without ceremony. In daylight, those differences are obvious and ordinary. At night, in this hush, they feel almost moral. How much belongs to whom? What has been taken by custom? What has been earned by labour? What must still be carried into another day before it becomes bread, tax, favour, or complaint? No one can quite agree whether medieval life is governed more by faith or by tallying. Men kneel at shrines. Yes, they kiss relics, fear omens, cross themselves at thunder, and light candles before painted saints. But they also count relentlessly loaves, hens, rents, bushels, lambs, debts, days owed in service, lengths of cloth, spoons of salt, and the number of good boards left in a roof before winter. A village lives by prayer in the heart, perhaps, but by arithmetic in the hand. You scratch another line into the wax and remember, with a little private annoyance, that Odo will likely ask after timber again if the support beam worsens. Timber means request. Request means delay. Delay means risk. Everything in this world seems eventually to pass through someone else's permission, unless you can fix it yourself with a wedge, cord, and stubbornness. That, perhaps, is why practical men grow so devoted to practical repairs. A peg you replace yourself is worth 3 promises from a manor office. From the shelf above the bench you take down a small scrap of parchment, precious enough that you use both sides and only for things worth preserving beyond the week. A longer account belongs here, not on wax. You dip a reed pen into the little horn of ink and make a few spare notes, names, amounts, obligations that ought not be trusted to memory alone. The ink goes on a little pale at first, then darkens as it dries. You always feel a certain respectful distance from writing. It remains slightly priestly no matter how often you do it. A man may handle grain all day and still feel, when the pen is in his fingers, that he has borrowed briefly from the world of scribes and charters. You smile faintly at the thought. If some monastery clerk saw your records, he would probably wince as though struck. The lines are practical, the spellings inconsistent, the abbreviations entirely your own. Still, they say what needs saying. That is enough. The hearth gives a soft collapse as one ember settles into another. You look up. The dog outside shifts, then gives a low, sleepy sigh against the threshold. Good creature. He has asked for nothing all day but toleration and a patch of earth, which places him above many Christians. Earlier you gave him the crust too hard for your own supper. He accepted it with grave dignity, then resumed acting as though your kindness had been expected from the start. You return to the accounts, a tally of measures ground, a note on the fish Edric offered in trade. 2 needles from Isabel if she returns by this road another week, the manor portion to be collected at dawn, wheat finer than average from the grange, Bran likely to complain again before the month is out, though no written record is needed for that prophecy. There is a kind of satisfaction in all this, thin but real. The day, once so noisy and diffuse, becomes a set of marks you can hold in one hand. Still, accounts are never only about numbers. They carry people inside them. Hamo's guarded nod when he saw the meal was fair, Alice's dry mouth and sharper eyes, the Reeves' inspection, the travellers at the ford with other roads clinging to their cloaks, even the old fisherman's warning about strange eddies below the bend lingers somewhere in your thoughts. Not because it belongs in the tally, but because all working lives are bordered by what cannot be accounted for. Some swear a candle that gutters suddenly while accounts are being made is a warning against error or theft. Others say it merely means a draught found the flame before you found the draught. Tonight the beeswax burns steadily enough, though one wick leans and pools a little at the base. You trim it with the knife and watch the flame recover. Small mercies, small corrections. These are the true ornaments of the evening. At last you set down the stylus and lean back, flexing the stiffness from your fingers. The room is quiet enough now that you can hear the river separately from the breeze in the reeds outside. It has a steadier voice after dark, less sparkling, more continuous. The priory bell sounds far off through the night air, marking an hour you do not bother naming. Somewhere beyond the fields a cart rumbles faintly, late on the road, then that too fades. You gather the tablet, cover the ink, fold the parchment, and tuck it into the small wooden chest where you keep such fragile order as your life permits. The lid closes with a dry click. There, The day has been counted, not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough that morning may begin without old confusions waiting like thieves in the corner. You warm your hands one last time over the low fire and sit still a while in the candlelight, letting the arithmetic settle into silence. Outside, the river keeps the only endless account that matters to the mill. Inside, your own figures rest in wax and ink, trying with humble seriousness to keep hunger, duty, and accusation from tipping too far to one side. The candle burns lower, its flame steadier now that the small adjustments have been made, and the mill begins to feel like a place withdrawn from the world rather than working within it. Night has settled properly outside. The last traces of evening have faded from the yard, leaving only a dim outline of the wheel against the darker river beyond. You leave the accounts behind and climb the narrow ladder to the loft above, carrying the candle with one hand and steadying yourself with the other against the worn wood. The loft is low and close, its beams pressing down like a thought you cannot quite shake. Here the air is warmer, thick with the scent of stored grain, old timber, and the faint, restless presence of creatures that share your space whether invited or not. Sacks lie stacked in uneven rows, some full, some waiting, all of them whispering softly when the night air moves through cracks in the boards. You set the candle in a shallow niche and sit on the rough pallet laid out in the corner, straw packed thin under a wool blanket that carries the memory of many nights. You lie back, but not fully at rest. No miller truly sleeps at once. The body relaxes first, grateful for the end of lifting and measuring, but the mind lingers in its duties. You listen, because listening never truly stops here. Below, the mill has quieted, but it has not fallen silent. The wheel turns slowly still, reduced to a gentler rhythm, water slipping past its paddles with the soft, persistent sound. The wood answers with small settling noises, tiny cracks and sighs as beams adjust to cooling air. The stones, now still, seem to hold a kind of memory of motion, as if they might begin again at any moment if called. And then there are the smaller sounds. A faint scratching somewhere near the far sacks, a rustle of straw, the quiet, purposeful movement of rats who consider this place less your domain than theirs. You hear one pause, then continue, its claws tapping lightly against wood. It knows the paths between sacks better than you ever will. Some swear that rats in a mill bring luck, because they only thrive where grain is plentiful. Others swear they bring ruin, because they take more than their share and leave behind sickness in their wake. Even now, it is hard to tell whether their presence is a sign of abundance or decay. You turn your head slightly and watch the candle flame flicker. Its light stretches across the beams, making them seem larger than they are. Shadows gather in the corners where the light cannot reach, and for a moment, the loft feels deeper than it should, as though the darkness holds more space than the boards allow. This is when the stories return. Not the loud kind told at tables with ale, but the quieter ones that belong to places like this, half remembered, half believed, and never entirely dismissed. Mills, they say, are restless at night. The turning of the wheel, the grinding of stone, the constant labour done here by day leaves something behind after dark. Some swear they have heard the stones move when no grain was fed to them. Others claim the wheel has turned under moonlight with no hand at the sluice. No one can quite agree whether such tales are born from truth, imagination, or the simple unease of sleeping above a place that never fully sleeps. You listen more carefully now. The scratching shifts. A small body moves across a beam, pauses, then disappears into a gap between sacks. The sound is ordinary, familiar, yet in the quiet of night it carries a different weight. The river outside continues its steady flow, a constant reassurance that something in the world remains unchanged, no matter what stories gather in the dark. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again. Sleep does not come all at once here. It comes in stages, like the slowing of the wheel. First the body grows heavy, then the thoughts begin to loosen their grip. But before that, there is always this time, this listening time, when the mind lingers between waking and rest, alert to every small shift in sound. Below, a loose board creaks softly. You still for a moment, then let out a slow breath. The mill settles again. Nothing more follows. You have learned not to rise for every sound. If you did, you would never sleep at all. A mill has 100 voices, and most of them mean nothing at all. The skill lies in knowing which to heed and which to let pass into the night. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders. The wool is rough but warm enough. The straw beneath you shifts slightly as you settle, releasing a faint dry scent that mixes with the grain and wood around you. It is not comfort in the way a noble might understand it, but it is sufficient, and sufficiency, here, is a kind of luxury. Your thoughts drift, not in any grand direction, but in the quiet, wandering way of a tired mind. You think of the day, the early mist, the first turning of the wheel, the steady stream of villagers and their grain, the reeve's measured inspection, the travellers at the ford. Each moment feels both close and distant now, as though it belongs to another version of the same place. You think, too, of the river. It moves on, whether you watch it or not. It powers the mill, feeds the fields, shapes the land in ways no one fully sees. Some swear that rivers remember everything that passes through them, that every word spoken near the water, every grain washed away, every step taken at the ford is carried somewhere, recorded in ways no man can read. It is a comforting thought, in its way, that nothing is entirely lost, that even the smallest part of your day becomes part of something larger. Or perhaps it is only water, moving because it must. The candle flickers again, then steadies. Its light has grown softer now, the wax lower, the flame smaller. You watch it for a moment longer, then reach out and pinch it gently between damp fingers. Darkness settles at once, deeper than before, but not complete. The faint glow of the coals below seeps upward through the cracks in the boards, and the night outside carries its own dim light. You lie back fully now. The sounds of the mill continue around you, the river, the wood, the quiet life of the loft, but they no longer demand your attention. They become part of the background, a steady presence that fades as sleep begins to take hold. And slowly, at last, the long day releases you. Sleep, when it finally comes, does not stay deep for long. It loosens its hold sometime in the darkest stretch of night. When the cold has settled fully into the boards, and the world beyond the mill lies quiet under a sky you cannot see, but can almost feel pressing down, you stir without fully waking, caught between the fading warmth of rest and the faint insistence of something not quite right. It is not a sound that wakes you, at least not at first, but the absence of one. The mill is too still. Your eyes open slowly into the dimness. The loft is a shape more than a place now, familiar only by memory. The sacks loom as darker shadows against the dark, and the beams above are little more than lines guessed at by habit. For a moment, you lie without moving, listening. There it is again, or rather there is not. The wheel has stopped. You know its sound too well to mistake its absence. Even in sleep, you have grown used to the slow, steady murmur of water turning wood, the faint creak of movement carried through the frame. Now, nothing, only the river itself, softer, unbroken by the labour you usually demand from it. You push yourself up onto one elbow, the blanket slipping from your shoulder. The air bites a little at your skin, sharper now than it felt before you slept. Below, the mill holds its breath. No one can quite agree whether such moments mean trouble or simply change. A branch caught in the wheel, a shift in the current, a gate eased too far, or nothing at all, except the river deciding for a while to go its own way. You sit up fully now. The straw beneath you rustles softly, louder in the silence than it should be. For a brief moment, you consider lying back down. Morning will come soon enough. The wheel can wait. The river has never needed your permission to move or pause. But then the habit of care returns, stronger than comfort. A mill left unattended, even for a night, is a risk. Not always a great one, but enough that you rise. The ladder creaks under your weight as you descend, each step placed with quiet familiarity. The mill below is darker than the loft, the faint glow of the banked coals barely touching the edges of the room. You move toward the door, guided more by memory than sight, and push it open. Cold air meets you at once. Outside, the night is deep and clear. The sky stretches above, scattered with stars that seem sharper in the chill. The river glimmers faintly, a dark ribbon with silver edges where the starlight catches it, and the wheel still. Water slides past it without resistance, slipping through the paddles with a quiet, indifferent sound. No turning, no labour, just flow. You step closer, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The wood of the wheel is slick with cold. You lay a hand against it, feeling the stillness where there should be motion. Lazy thing, you murmur. The wheel does not answer, which is perhaps for the best. You crouch near the sluice, peering into the dim outline of the mechanism. The gate has shifted, just enough to ease the pressure. Whether by your own earlier hand or by the subtle persuasion of water against wood, it has slipped from its proper place. A small thing, a quiet thing, but enough to still the turning. You adjust it carefully, fingers stiff from the cold. The wood resists, then yields with a low, reluctant sound. Water gathers again, presses forward, finds its path. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, slowly, the wheel stirs, not with the strong certainty of daytime, but with a hesitant movement, as though remembering its purpose. One paddle dips, then another. The axle shifts. The faintest creak returns. You watch it, waiting. The motion steadies, though it remains slower than before. Enough for now, enough to keep the mill alive through the night, even if it does no real work until morning. You stand and brush your hands together, more from habit than necessity. The cold has settled into your fingers now, and you flex them once before drawing your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The night feels different out here. Quieter, certainly, but also wider. Without the noise of the mill, the world beyond it seems to press closer. The river sounds larger, the wind in the distant trees more deliberate. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The stars hold their places without comment. You glance downstream, toward the bend Edric mentioned earlier. The dark shape of the water there looks no different than it did by day, yet the thought lingers. Strange eddies, unusual movement. It is easy, in this light, to imagine the river holding more than it shows. Some swear that water changes character at night, that it grows deeper in ways that cannot be measured, that it carries things unseen along its surface. Others say water is water, day or night, and only the human mind fills the dark with invention. Even now, standing by the quiet wheel, it is hard to tell which feels more convincing. You turn back toward the mill. The door stands open behind you, a darker rectangle against the already dark wall. The faint glow of the coals inside offers a small promise of warmth. You step back in and close the door firmly, shutting out the wider night. Inside, the mill feels smaller again, contained, familiar. The faint movement of the wheel returns through the floor, just enough to remind you that the place lives still. You stand a moment longer, listening, making certain nothing else has shifted. Nothing else has chosen this hour to demand your attention. Nothing does. Satisfied, you climb the ladder once more. The loft welcomes you back with its close, grain-scented air. You settle onto the pallet, pulling the blanket around you more tightly this time. Sleep comes easier now. The brief interruption has passed, the small imbalance corrected. The mill has returned to its quiet rhythm, and with it, your place within it feels steadier again. Below, the wheel turns slowly, the river flows on, the night deepens. And this time, when you close your eyes, you drift more fully into rest, the sounds of the mill folding gently around you like a familiar unspoken promise that morning will come, and with it, another long, dusty day. Morning does not arrive suddenly. It seeps back into the world the same way night did, quietly, patiently, without asking whether you're ready for it. You wake before the light, not fully at once, but in that slow returning way where the body remembers its duties before the mind catches up. The blanket is still wrapped around you, though the warmth has faded. The loft air has grown colder again, carrying the faint dampness that settles just before dawn. Below, the mill speaks softly to itself, the wheel turning, the wood adjusting, the river continuing its endless conversation. You lie still for a moment, listening. There is comfort in this hour. Not ease, exactly, but familiarity. The sounds you heard in the night now feel ordinary again, stripped of their uncertainty. The scratching in the sacks is only rats. The creaking beams are only wood. The slow turning below is only the mill remembering its work. Whatever the darkness suggested, the coming light gently refuses to confirm. You sit up, pushing the blanket aside, and draw a slow breath. The scent of grain is stronger now, settled deep into the air. It mingles with the faint smoke from the hearth below, the lingering trace of yesterday's work, and the quiet, persistent presence of the river beyond the wall. You rub your hands together, feeling the stiffness still lingering in your fingers, then swing your legs over the side of the pallet. Another day waits. You descend the ladder carefully, each step familiar beneath your feet. The mill below greets you as it always does, unchanged in its essentials, though every day leaves its mark in ways too small to name. The coals in the hearth have dimmed to a soft red glow. The candle stubs sit where you left them, hardened wax pooled at their base. The sacks remain lined along the wall, patient and silent, holding their quiet promise of labour to come. You stir the coals first. A small piece of wood, a careful breath, and the faint glow stirs back to life. Smoke rises, thin and hesitant at first, then steadier. The warmth returns slowly, not enough to chase the chill entirely, but enough to take the edge from the air. You step to the door and open it. The world outside is pale with early light. The sky holds that soft grey blue that belongs only to the moments before sunrise fully claims the day. The river wears a thin veil of mist again, just as it did yesterday, as though nothing has changed at all. The wheel turns steadily now, the adjustment you made in the night holding true. For a moment you simply stand there. This is the hour before the village wakes, before the carts begin their slow approach, before the voices, the questions, the watchful eyes. It belongs to no one in particular, and so it feels, briefly, like it belongs to you. A bird calls somewhere near the reeds, another answers. The sound is small but certain, a quiet declaration that the world continues. You step out into the yard, boots pressing into the damp earth, and walk toward the wheel. The wood is cold under your hand, but alive with motion. Water moves beneath it, steady and untroubled, carrying whatever it carries from places you will never see to places you will never visit. Some swear that rivers remember every dawn they have ever touched, that each morning is not new, but part of a long, unbroken chain stretching back beyond memory. Others say dawn is simply light returning to a place that has grown dark, nothing more. Even now, it is hard to tell which thought feels truer. You turn back toward the mill. Inside, the room waits, empty, for now. Soon it will fill again with grain, with voices, with the quiet tension that comes whenever food passes through human hands. The sacks will be lifted, the scales set, the stones fed, the dust stirred once more into the air. But not yet. You take a moment longer, standing in the doorway as the light strengthens, and feel the shape of the day before it begins. Not in detail, not in certainty, but in rhythm. You know how it will move. You know where it will strain. You know where it will settle. The reeve will return, or someone in his place. The villagers will come with their grain and their suspicions. The wheel will turn. The stones will grind. The small repairs you made will hold, or they will not, and you will mend them again. This is the life. Not grand, not easy, but steady. You step back inside and begin again. The fire catches a little stronger. The first faint warmth spreads. You reach for the tools, the scoop, the scales. Your hands remember their work before your thoughts do. The mill shifts from quiet to readiness, from rest to purpose. And somewhere down the muddy road, still hidden by the curve and the morning mist, the first cart of the new day is already on its way. The cart arrives as the light finally breaks. You hear it before you see it, the same slow creak of wood, the same patient tread of hooves against damp earth, the same quiet persistence that begins every day here as it ended the last. You stand in the doorway of the mill, hands already dusted from touching the sacks, the tools, the work that never truly leaves you, and watch as the shape emerges through the thinning mist. Another villager, another load of grain, another small piece of the world brought to your threshold to be changed. You nod as he approaches. He nods back. No words are needed yet. They will come, as they always do, but not in this first moment. This first moment belongs to the simple recognition of roles resumed. He brings, you grind, the river turns, the day begins again. Inside, the mill waits with quiet readiness. You move to the sluice and adjust it, letting the water press more firmly against the wheel. It responds at once, gathering strength, turning with that deep, familiar motion that carries through the beams and into your bones. The axle answers, the gears engage, the stones begin their low, steady murmur once more. The sound fills the space, not loudly, not harshly, but completely. It settles into every corner, every board, every thought. It is the sound of work, of transformation, of something constant enough to build a life around. You take the sack from the man and open it. Grain spills into your hands cool, solid, real. You test it as you always do, feeling its weight, its dryness, its promise. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. The same actions repeat, but never quite the same way. You pour the grain into the hopper. It falls. The stones take it. And the day moves forward. But now something in you is slower. Not in body, not in duty, but in thought. The long rhythm of yesterday, of the night, of this morning, begins to soften at the edges. The sharpness of tasks gives way to something gentler, more distant, as though the mill itself is no longer only a place of labour, but a place of quiet passage. You continue the work, but it no longer presses. The man watches, as they all do. You measure, as you always have. The scale balances, the meal falls, the dust rises, but the urgency has thinned, replaced by a calm that settles deeper than effort. The light grows stronger outside. It filters through the shutters, softer now, less cold than before. The mist lifts fully from the river, revealing its steady path, unchanged and untroubled. The wheel turns with quiet certainty. The beams hold. The small repairs you made have become part of the whole, indistinguishable from the rest. Everything continues, and yet everything feels still. The voices that will come, the questions, the suspicions, the small complaints seem distant now, as though they belong to another layer of the day, one that no longer quite reaches you. You move through the motions with practiced ease, your hands knowing what to do without asking your mind to follow closely. Grain becomes flour, flour becomes measure, measure becomes sustenance. The cycle holds. You glance once toward the doorway. The dog still lies there, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of its breathing. The yard beyond is quiet. No second cart yet. No gathering line. Just the open space of morning, stretching gently outward. You turn back to the work. The man takes his sack when it is ready. He nods again. You return it. He leaves. The sound of his cart fades down the road, replaced once more by the steady presence of the mill. And then, for a moment, there is nothing else. No voices, no questions, no movement beyond the turning of the wheel and the slow drift of dust in the light. You stand there, hands resting lightly on the edge of the meal chest, and let the quiet settle fully. This is the part no one speaks of. Not the labour, not the toll, not the suspicion or the small authority or the endless need to balance what cannot truly be balanced. But this brief stillness, this moment where the mill, the river, the day, and your place within them all align without effort. You breathe. The air is warm now, carrying the scent of grain and wood and something softer beneath it all, something almost like rest. You close your eyes, just for a moment, and when you open them again, the world has not changed. The wheel turns, the river flows, the mill stands, and you are here, not as a figure in a story, not as keeper of accounts or a judge of grain, but simply as part of the rhythm that continues whether you name it or not. The light grows, the dust drifts, the sound remains, and slowly, gently, the edges of the day begin to fade not into darkness this time, but into something quieter, something softer, as though the world itself is drawing a blanket over its own shoulders. The mill grows dim, not from the loss of light, but from the easing of attention. The details soften, the sharp lines blur, the weight of the day lifts, piece by piece, until what remains is only the steady, comforting presence of the place itself. You feel it around you, in the beams, in the stones, in the slow turning of the wheel, in the endless, patient movement of the river. There is nothing more to do now, nothing more to hold, nothing more to measure. The day has given what it will give. The work has been done and will be done again. And so you let go. You let the sounds drift into the distance. You let the light settle into warmth. You let the mill and the river and the quiet world beyond it all carry you gently into stillness. And there, at last, everything rests.